Hi, I'm Naomi. I'm the Sewing School Manager here at Fabric Godmother. Buttonholes are often one of those final steps in making a garment and one that many sewers dread. Today I'm going to be guiding you through finding the perfect placement for your buttonholes, marking them up, sewing them on an automatic buttonhole foot, and then marking your buttonholes for sewing later. I'm going to be working with our own carnation blouse. You'll notice that while the buttonholes run vertically on the placket, they run horizontally on the collar, and the position of the buttons in the buttonholes is slightly different, so central on the placket and slightly to the side on the collar. We'll also look at the cuff. So on the carnation blouse they run parallel to the edge, but this can vary from pattern to pattern. Many patterns, including our own, come with a buttonhole guide, but this is purely a guide. Buttonhole placement will vary from body to body. It's always a good idea to have a button or buttonhole at the fullest part of the bust to avoid gaping when worn. So to find this, you can put the blouse on and find the fullest point and then mark across on the placket. I'm going to fold the seam allowance away on the top of the buttonhole placket guide, and you can see that mark I originally made is different to the placement here, but we're going to use this as a guide to distribute the buttons just to get an idea of where we want them to be. So the first button will go there because we definitely want one here, and we can decide how many we want and where we want them. So you can change how high up you want them, if you want them a bit lower, so we can put in the first and last ones and then just redistribute those just to get an idea of where you would like them to be and whether you need them a bit further apart or closer together, just to get an idea of the first and the last button. Once you've decided on your placement, we're going to use the top buttonhole placement and the midpoint as your guide, and we can measure between them. So if I know that I'm going to have two buttonholes between here, I measure the distance and then I'm going to divide it into 3 spaces. So I know that I've got 18 and I can mark 6 and another 6 and then mark the same distance all the way down. Alternatively, I can use a buttonhole gauge, and this will give me an accurate measurement without having to measure each one. So I count the number of buttonholes on the prongs. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 buttonholes, and I place the top one on the top buttonhole and move the last one down to the mid one to the midpoint, and then I just mark in my buttonholes all the way down to that final one, and I can even check by measuring. This is the center point of my buttonhole, but it's worth checking where my start point is. So I always like to make a sample buttonhole with the button I'm going to be using to get the exact length of that buttonhole, and then I use a measuring tool to measure exactly how long my buttonhole is, and then I find half of that measurement, and that's what I'm going to mark below that central point as my start point for my buttonhole. It's also worth checking at this point that that start point is in the center, so just checking how far and just making sure that it's in the very middle of my placket, and I've marked it with a different color pen so I can tell the difference between the start point and the center point. Finding the start point for the collar buttonhole is a little bit different. So the center point is in line with the other buttons. We want it to sit, the button to sit in line with the others. But where we start the buttonhole will be a little bit different. As you can see, I place the button. If we place it in the center, it can pull against there. So we actually want the buttonhole to sit further this way, with the end of the buttonhole sitting closer to the button. So we're going to start it here. The cuff will be done using either of those methods. With the carnation blouse, the buttonholes run perpendicular to the cuff edge, so we'll use the method where we find half of the measurement and mark that in. If you have a cuff where the buttonholes run parallel to the cuff edge, then we would use the method used on the collar. Once the buttonholes are marked, we're ready to sew the buttonholes, and I'm using an automatic buttonhole foot here. This is the same for a lot of machines have this one. I've put the button in the back. This allows the machine to know what size the buttonhole needs to be. And then I'm going to place it onto my machine. And then there's a lever that comes down, which guides the foot. And I'm set my machine to buttonhole setting. We're ready to sew. Once the buttonholes are marked up, we're ready to sew. And we're starting on that lower dot, the green one in my case, because that's the start point. We're going to get it under the machine, and we're lining up the green dot with the centre of the foot. So the needle with the buttonhole is often to one side, so we're lining up with the centre of the foot rather than the needle. If you want to, you can reset your machine to 1 to the straight stitch, so that you can get the needle in the centre and put the needle down to check, just if you want to be really careful. But once you've got it lined up, we're ready to sew. Once the buttonholes are sewn, we need to open them up. And there are 2 ways to do this. You can use a pin across the top of your buttonhole and just slightly in front of that stitching at the end. And you can insert a seam ripper in and push all the way up to that pin. I prefer to use a chisel, buttonhole chisel, and a mat. We just place the mat underneath and then place the buttonhole chisel over the top and press down, and you get a lovely clean buttonhole. You can also use some fray stop, and you use this before you cut the buttonhole. Just apply a little bit and this will stop it fraying. Just make sure you use it on a surface that won't be damaged by it. Finally, I need to mark the placement of my buttons. I'm going to lay one placket over the other in place and just check it's sitting on top nicely. And I want to mark in the centre of each of these buttonholes on the placket. So I'm going to mark through my buttonhole straight down, and then I just open up and just check that it's in the centre. So using my tool again, I'm just going to centralise that so it needs to come over a little bit. So I'm going to mark it here. So it's right in the centre of that placket. The collar is going to be a little bit different. We want it to be in line with these buttonholes here. So it's going to be off to one side slightly. So we're lining up with here, put the pen through and mark. And that's where the button is going to be sewn on the collar. I hope you found that helpful and you feel more confident to tackle buttonholes now. If you head over to our blog, you'll find lots more hints and tutorials, which is linked below. We'd love to hear if you have any tips for sewing buttonholes. Do subscribe to our channel to get our videos first. Thanks for watching.